Food is more than just what's on our plate. It's the places where it's grown, it's the people who grow it, and so much more. Join me, Janice Person, your host, on Grounded by the Farm every other week as we talk about the foods we love. As we launched, I wanted to provide a bonus episode to help people understand my background and some of the things that got me into agriculture. As such, this episode will not focus on food as much as it is on farm and sort of how I got interested and involved in agriculture. I frequently point to a few key individuals on that path. I was born and raised a city girl in Memphis, Tennessee. My family's experience with agriculture was pretty limited, although we had a garden and would routinely go to the farmer's market to buy things for our deep freeze and things along that line. I never really had a chance to go out and meet farmers until I was working for a gentleman named Adam Ballinger. Adam is somebody who my mom knew her whole lifetime, and my grandmother and his mom were friends their whole lifetime. So he was a presence in my family forever, and somebody I still really admire. He was the publisher of some magazines called Cotton Farming, Rice Farming, Custom Applicator. He had a Memphis home and living kind of magazine. I can't remember the name of it. I can remember getting the opportunity to work for him, and I had no idea that I was going to be working in agriculture, but it was such a great idea for a journalism student to get this opportunity that I snatched it up immediately without thinking about how it may change my course, how it may change everything for me. I loved the work. I loved the fact that I was getting new challenges on the regular basis. I had the opportunity to work with incredible people in the office, but I think something really changed for me the first time I went out on a business trip by myself. It's silly now to think about it, but way back, it was uncommon for somebody who was in college or grad school to have spent time in a hotel by themselves. It was really kind of a moment of turning into adulthood in a different way. Being able to rent a car even was a big deal. And I can remember going down to do an interview first with a Russian agricultural expert. I had been studying Russian while I was in grad school, and that's a whole other story. But I went down to interview him. And then I had a chance to go out on the farm and interview a gentleman named Mr. Ray Young. He was doing some research and putting it into practice on his farm, looking at ways to make it easier for him to plant on time, doing some things to help the soil structure stay intact. It was impressive to see the amount of knowledge he had about soils. I had taken geology classes. I knew the basics of some of the things on different soil types, but it wasn't until he took a shovel out of his pickup truck, dug down into the earth, and helped me really see the benefit of soil structure, earthworm activity, explained to me how roots that remain in one place become kind of like in-the-field composting effort. Even today, decades later, I have a sense of wonder about soils because Adam sent me on a business trip and because Mr. Ray was such a great storyteller, such a visionary in the world of the environment. I'm still blown away by the opportunity I was given. With all of that in mind, as I started doing farmer interviews for this and really focusing in on that food dialogue that my family shares, I wanted to go back to kind of my agricultural roots, and I took a trip down to Louisiana. I was able to go back and visit Mr. Ray, and we really hadn't talked about food very much when I was on his farm the first time I went down, but I will tell you, he made a killer grilled cheese sandwich and tomato soup for lunch that day that I will never forget because I was cold and I was pretty darn hungry. My conversations with Mr. Ray really focus in on the environment and his work on the farm. But his love of food shows up too, because as I drove down and I got there Thursday night for dinner, he and Miss Dorothy had been in the kitchen doing their teamwork as it comes to cooking dinner, and they had black-eyed peas, they had green tomatoes ready to fry up, and they had some tenderloin. I wanted to not only visit with him, but I recorded a short conversation And I want to share that with you because I think you will feel from it some of the passion I have for agriculture, some of the things I've learned over time, and some of the kind of giving souls that I have met across my career, some of whom I'll be able to interview on this podcast, others I won't have an opportunity to do, but it will show you sort of how I became somebody so deeply entrenched in agriculture, although I had been raised and still consider myself a full-blown city girl. It really does allow me to live across both communities. And this podcast is my opportunity to bring those conversations to a new audience, to people who may not know farmers in their area, may not even live in an area where farmers are within any reasonable drive or access. That's what I want to do here on Grounded by the Farm. We're going to start with a nice conversation with Mr. Ray, talk a little bit about the history of his family and what they've been doing, a lot about the soils and thinking about conservation, and a little bit about the fact he's been in this business so long. He came back from the Korean War and has been working in this area that we now call sustainability, but he would just refer to it as agriculture and farming and trying to do the best you can do. And he's been doing that for a number of years. He'll be turning 90, and Miss Dorothy will also have her birthday in December. So I want to tell them both happy birthday. And now here's that conversation with Mr. Ray. Can we shift over and do some of the stuff I need to do? So I'm starting. It's like a radio show, but it'll be on your cell phones and on your computers, and it's going to be called Grounded by the Farm. And the whole idea of it is that very few people in the U.S. get a chance to come out and visit farmers in real life, because farmers are such a low percentage, only like 1.5% of America farms.
Less than 2, yeah.
And lots of us don't know farmers, so how do you learn from that? So this show is going to give people the opportunities I've had. So I get to come out and visit farmers like you, and I'll get these stories, and then I can put it on there, and I can help people find it. So that's what I'm trying to do.
Great.
And I thought, as I started pulling this together, I thought, well, how do you start a show like that? Like, if that's what you want to do, how do you start? And I decided I probably ought to visit the first farm I ever visited. And I don't know if you realized you were the first farmer I ever came to visit on the farm.
I didn't remember that you came to visit the farm, but I remember meeting you. I think it was out of Beltwide, and I did your first interview.
Yeah, I came out to the farm before that and interviewed you about stale seed bed. So if you can get closer to the microphone, it may make my recorder hear you better. But but I wanted to
tell me, is this about close enough?
Yep.
Just about right?
That looks pretty good. I'm looking at the numbers here to see if you're in the middle.
About there?
Yep.
Okay.
And so so I was wondering, like, first off, can you tell people what this area was like? Is the area different?
It's different now, very different now. When we came to this part of the country in 1955, it was a booming little town. Stores would be open on Saturday till midnight. The cotton gins were running. There was a lot of labor on the farms because this area here was 75 or 80% cotton, and that means a lot of hand labor still in the mid-50s. So there were a lot of people that lived here. We had a good-sized school. On and on it goes. But as mechanization got better, chemical weed control, mechanical pickers came in, labor had to leave the farm because there was not that much labor needed anymore. Mm-hmm. And guess what? They left the little towns for the big cities where there was employment.
Yeah, so where there were factory jobs and
stuff. Our town is kind
of
dried up in the meantime. Mm-hmm. Very few stores still in town, and the school has closed, and just not near as many people around here as there were in the mid-50s. It started getting away in the late 60s and early 70s.
Yeah.
Mechanization, chemical weed control, mechanical pickers, all of those things just there was not the need for labor.
When I
anymore.
first came here, one of the things that we talked about a lot was y'all were doing something called stale seed bed. And at the time, we were talking about conservation tillage.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
some parts of the country were talking about no-till.
Yes.
Can you tell people
Yes.
what all that stuff is? Because a lot of people who haven't been on a farm haven't really thought much about tillage.
Yep.
Disking,
Yeah.
it's
Yes.
plowing, tilling.
Yeah, that's plowing. Yes.
And so how did you get to where you didn't want to till so much, and why?
We farm a good bit of clay soils. When they're wet, they're really wet, and we were not able to. We were raising mostly cotton at this time. This is early '80s, and we couldn't get a crop planted on time because clay soils stay so wet in the springtime, and we decided that we had to quit plowing in the springtime. We said we believe that we can do this, and we can get our crops planted in the proper planting window for a crop. So we decided we would not plow in the springtime. We would put the ground put the land in rows in the fall, and then we would plant on that seed bed in the spring. Not quite no-till, because at times we still do a little tilling, but we called it stale seed bed because we once built that row, and then we continued to farm on that same row. We didn't go ahead and disc it down. It was the same row, so it was stale because it stayed there year after year, that very same row.
Yeah.
Didn't disc it down. And lo and behold, it worked. And after about the third year we did that, we said, this will work. And sure enough, it did and has and still does.
Yeah, I think a lot of people remember seeing gardens where you put a nice row. It's like a cone of ground together. That's what
Yes.
we call a row.
Mhm.
And that way you put the seed in there. And cotton, I think you used to tell me it doesn't like wet feet. And so
Not
a lot
really.
of people would put it in a row because otherwise,
Sure.
if you've been discing, the water kind of sits right there on the top of the ground. But what
Exactly.
you showed me, and I remember this so clearly, Mr. Ray, I remember so clearly being here like in a February, and we were out looking at ground, and it was wet and cold, and you got a shovel out of the back of the truck to show me what it looked like underneath the surface.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
was somebody in college and grad school who loved the environment. I'd never thought about working in agriculture. And suddenly you took this spade full of soil and you started showing me what was happening. So what happens when you leave those plants and stuff there and you don't till it up?
Well, you protect that residue. You keep that residue on the surface as long as you can. It lessens the effect of hard rains for runoff. It helps water infiltration into the soil. The soil texture improves if you quit stirring it around. The texture improves. The good Lord takes care of that. He freezes it and thaws it, and He wets it and He dries it, and it just improves on its own. But if you go in and you disc every year, you disc it and you disc it again, and you rebuild the row in the springtime, you're destroying the good soil structure that is happening on its own if you leave it alone. And we thought that, and once we tried it, lo and behold, it really worked. Soil will develop a structure of its own. Organic matter in the early 80s on most of our soils was about 1%. Now, after 35, 36 years, it's from 3 to 5%. And
Wow.
we were told that you can't improve organic matter in soil in the South because the residue deteriorates. It goes through a change phase, and when you stir the soil, you destroy the organic matter in it.
And the organic matter is like extra nutrients and things like
it's
that.
Extra nutrients on its own makes other nutrients available, and we found that just by leaving alone, the soil structure just improved so much. And then along with it, now it's taken 35 years to come from 1% to 3 to 5%, but there's just a lot of benefits that go along.
And you
with
have more
organic
earthworms that are happy.
You go out there, and we could go out there and dig right now and find earthworms.
We may have to do that so I can show photos.
Well, we may can do that. They might have retreated a little bit with this cold weather, but most years you can go out and you can find earthworms fairly easy. Used to could not find earthworms.
Yeah. You mentioned that I came out and did an interview and a story on you. And how many times have you been interviewed by media? I mean, can you count that
I'm
high?
not sure. Several times, I guess. People.
Several. There are several that were just beautifully framed and on the walls, Mr. Ray. I think you're being a little bit. So I posted on my Facebook that I was going to be in Louisiana and I was going to see my dear friends, Mr. Ray Young, and people like John Bradley, who used to work at UT Milan, which was known as the big station in the South.
Yep.
He said you taught him everything he knew almost,
Well,
that you were a pioneer, that you shared.
We didn't quite do that. We visited him, and he was having problems getting people to go along. He was experimenting with no-till and reduced tillage, and they were needing it pretty bad in some areas of Tennessee because the soil was the terrain was rolling, and they were getting a lot of erosion. And he saw the need for no-till, but he said, we're doing it here on the experiment station, but people say they can't do it on the farm. And he said, you did it on the farm. And they said, well, if he can do it, we can do it. So it helped really get it off to a good start. And when we went and explained to people how to do it, most everybody tried it, and it has worked. Yields have improved, and get the crops planted on time, and just a lot of good things come along with it.
Yeah. Erosion, the problems of erosion, I think we make jokes about it, but we frequently say that folks along this river are farming Iowa dirt because back when people didn't know how to deal with erosion, rain would wash your soils off of the field that you had it in.
And flooded, with that soil would settle
and
out.
go right into the river, and then the Mississippi River would flood, and all that soil would just land right down here.
That's
where
the
you farm.
Soils.
Exactly. Yeah. I had no idea. I had not paid attention much to soil and all until I visited you. You're the person who opened my eyes to that, and you showed me ridge land and some of the alluvial soils, and you explained the difference. And I think that's some of the things that really stuck with me all these years. But I have to say, maybe the Beltwide, it was the first time I'd gone from as a business conference. Like I was a new kid on the block. I was just in college and grad school, and you and Miss Dorothy introduced me to, I think, everybody that was there, and there was probably 5,000 people at the meeting. But I think maybe you introduced me to 3,000 of the 5.
Yeah, we used to have 5,000 and 6,000 attend that Beltwide Cotton Conference. Not quite that many more.
And those are just some of the kinds of meetings that farmers like you go to and consultants like you go to. Tell me, you were one of the first cotton consultants, I think. So tell me how you got started doing that when you came back. You came back from the war, you came back from the service and started farming?
In 1949, I was a junior in college at Louisiana Tech. Mr. Dan Logan came up. He was a farmer in northwest Louisiana, a good-sized farmer, and a conservationist. He felt like that before you treated a field for boll weevil, you should know how many boll weevils are out there, and he said we ought to check these fields. He went to Louisiana Tech and hired a man who was a veteran of World War II, an older gentleman than most of us guys that were just out of high school. 1948, went over and checked Mr. Dan's cotton and a few neighbors. Everyone then wanted their cotton checked. So that guy hired me the next year to go over and help him check cotton. So I checked for Mr. Dan and his neighbors. And then the next year, people across the river heard about it, and they said, well, we want our cotton checked too. So they sent me across the river to start a consulting business there. And it just went over real big in that area. Now, then I was finishing college in 1950, and the Korean War was going on, and I knew I was fixing to have to go into service, so I enlisted in the Navy flight training program, and I went through the flight training program, flew 4 years during the Korean War. Then in 55, when I got out of the Navy, I said, I believe this field scouting thing would be a good business to get into, and it was all about boll weevils and cotton. That's what consulting was about then. That's where the need was. this area right here where we live now in Franklin Parish had the most cotton of any area in the state of Louisiana. So I said, if I'm going to go in the consulting business, I ought to go where the cotton is. So we came to Wisner in 1955. I knocked on some doors and said, I believe here's what I can do to help you. And a few people hired me, and away we went. And then everybody else wanted someone to check their cotton, and on it goes. So we've been right here since 1955. Thought this would be a good place to live and raise a family. And right here is now then Dr. Newsom, who headed up the entomology department at LSU, knew of the work I had done in northwest Louisiana a few years prior to that, and he wanted me to come to graduate school and study entomology. Just so happened in 1955, the first year that I was here, we had good insecticides at that time. Some byproducts of things that were discovered during the wartime, and we had good insecticides for the boll weevil. They had been used for 7 years, and the weevil got resistant in 1955. We didn't do a very good job of controlling. It's a wonder I didn't get fired because we didn't do too good a job of controlling the weevils. Dr. Newsom said, the other states are not believing that Louisiana has resistant weevils. He said, I want you to come and you're going to document the fact that these weevils are resistant to the chlorinated hydrocarbon insecticide is what we were using at that time. So I enrolled in school at LSU in the fall of 1955, and I collected weevils from a resistant strain, which was at St. Joseph. Most of the fields in Louisiana were resistant. They had a susceptible strain on the Perkins Road farm just outside of Baton Rouge. So I had a resistant strain and a susceptible strain to work with. So beyond the shadow of a doubt, that fall and winter, we did the research necessary to prove that these weevils are resistant to the chlorinated hydrocarbon insecticides. And the next year, the resistance was belt-wide.
Yeah.
They said, well, you guys were right. These weevils are resistant. So that was off and running. So then I came back to Wisner in 56, went back to LSU in the fall of 56, got my master's in entomology, and then we've been living here ever since. But,
and part of it, I guess from me being on the outside, part of what you guys have been able to do as consultants is you get information from a lot of different farms because you're seeing a lot of different farms, and you guys were able to figure out maybe environmentally better programs and, kind of watch outs that maybe an individual farmer wasn't necessarily fully tapped into. Y'all had a different level of research and things like that, and you've brought all those skills to cotton farmers down here since the 50s.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Right.
I don't think not very many people understand that people in 1950s were getting degrees in entomology to figure out the boll weevil. But in the South at that time, the boll weevil was so bad that it was devastating part of the South, right? Like making farms go belly up and stuff.
It was the difference in a profit or a loss is a weevil. If you didn't do a good job of controlling it. And up until 47, 48, 49, we had no good ways to control it.
Right.
The ways that we had were just not effective, but these good insecticides came along, and so we could control it, but then you don't want to over-control, spend too much money, so that's where consulting fit. You go and check and see when the weevils are bad enough in this field, you go treat it. If they're not bad in another adjoining field, don't treat it. That's where the field scouting came in and saved a lot of money and yet helped the growers make money. So
I'd say cotton consultants probably help farmers be more sustainable. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
How would you describe sustainability? You've been farming for so long. I know you like to talk about the soil and water.
The number one tenet of running a sustainable farm is profit. You're not sustainable if you can't make a profit. Now, you have to manage all the inputs that go into a crop. There are a lot of things, There's the fertility, there's nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. There a dozen micronutrients that require a certain amount, very small amounts, but they require those things. We have to do everything we know to do, then we depend on the good Lord to give us the weather, and He has the final say on how much the crop's going to make. But we need to do everything right, and then if the weather cooperates, we can make crops that are sustainable. You know, there's a certain amount of inputs you have to have, and if you don't have quite as much output as you do input, you're not sustainable. So there's a lot of talk about sustainability and doing it the right way, do it the right way for the environment, for the air that we're going to breathe, the water that we're going to drink. Farmers breathe the same air, drink the same water as all the consumers out there. So, but to be sustainable, there has to be a profit, or nothing is sustainable. You can't keep doing it if you can't make a profit.
Yeah, if you can't more than pay your bills. You need to more than pay your bills.
More than pay your bills.
Yeah.
You have to have just a little left over.
So you told me one of your first clients was on the Panola place, and I know Ben, I know Billy.
Yes.
But
yes.
How long did you consult with them?
63 or 64 years. From 1956 until a couple of years ago. I was their consultant. 60
That seems
years.
like a very sustainable business model. It seems like you got a long-term vision.
Ben is my fourth generation of managers on the Panola farm. I started with his great-grandfather in 1956.
Unbelievable. And you think, has their farm improved as much as the ground that you and Jesse farm?
Pretty much. We've advised them, and through their cooperation, we've brought it along.
Yeah.
We treated it like we thought it was our own farm.
Yeah. What all do people grow around here besides cotton? Because I love cotton, and you and I like to talk about it, but you grow other stuff as well.
I still like cotton. Franklin Parish used to have over 100,000 acres. Had about 20,000 this year. We went as low as about 5,000 3 or 4 years ago. The price got so weak on cotton, and inputs were very high. It's very expensive to raise cotton in this part of the world because we have weed pressure, we have insect pressure. It's pretty costly to control weeds and very costly to control insects. So corn price got to the point, and soybean price got to the point where we could make a profit raising corn and soybeans. So a lot of us quit cotton a few years ago, and some have come back. Like I say, we had about 20,000 acres this year, but the price needs to improve, or we may not see quite that much next year.
Yeah. Cotton takes more infrastructure than the other crops, more equipment, more time.
Takes a little more equipment, not as much as it used to, but it takes a little more, and there's just more input cost to cotton. Insecticides, weed control products, just a little more than corn, a little more than soybeans.
Yeah.
So we hope cotton will come back and stay. We don't know if the price needs to improve a little bit.
Yeah. Sometimes folks think they ought to have cotton that's organic or something like that. You've been doing this for a long time, and you're sitting there in a cotton shirt and cotton khakis.
Oh.
What do you think about how to grow cotton best, and is it safe and all those kind of things for like the great grandbaby, little Dorothy and stuff?
The products that come from cotton are safe as anything out there. Maybe safer than some of the man-made products. We do things that are good for the environment. When EPA and the Food and Drug Administration, when they approve a product to be used on the farm, you can count on it. That product is going to be safe because it is put through the mill with test after test after test. So you can count on cotton being safe to put on your back.
Exactly, and on that new baby that's named after your wife.
Absolutely.
That new great-grand.
Yes. We want them to be safe, and they are safe. If they wear cotton, it's safe.
Well, that was the questions I had. I will tell you, I'm probably going to talk about you a little bit when you aren't here. I'll probably add to it. because really, I think you're one of the people that helped me stay in agriculture. I thought I'd take a job
Well,
and do something
I'm
for a
glad of
little
that.
while. And
Because
then
we're glad to have you in agriculture. We are very glad to have you and keep you in agriculture.
Well, it's been because so many folks are so nice and open up their homes and help me learn so much more about the environment than I would learn necessarily just in college.
I think you have a way of coming across with a message that everybody can understand, and farmers need to be heard, and you're a good spokesman for agriculture. I'm glad you're here. I hope you stay.
Thank you, Mr. Ray. I think with that, I'm going to turn that recorder off. You can learn more about me on my website, janiceperson.com. And as always, you can find out more about Grounded on groundedbythefarm.com and Grounded by the Farm in all your favorite podcast apps.